The notices on the front door fluttered slightly in the early morning breeze, their edges curling like they were already bracing for the storm. I'd used clear tape, the kind that doesn't peel paint, because even in this moment, I cared about the house. My house. The ink on the notices was bold, black, Times New Roman, 12-point font, as the notary had suggested, professional, unyielding, like a line drawn in wet concrete. Private property, short-term lodging agreement required for all guests. Below that, in smaller print, non-compliance will result in immediate eviction per Local Ordinance 47.2. I'd memorized the code by now, recited it to myself while scrubbing dishes in the sink that wasn't mine for 6 years. The second notice was simpler. Check out, 12 p.m. today. No exceptions. I stepped back inside, the hardwood cool under my bare feet, and listened. The house wasn't silent, not really. It groaned under the weight of too many bodies, too many expectations. A faint snore drifted from the primary bedroom where Aunt Doreen had claimed the king-sized bed, her orthopedic pillow wedged against the headboard I'd sanded myself last month. The guest room, where I'd planned for Camden to stay, now smelled like cheap body spray and spilled energy drinks. Kinley's cousin, Trevor, had sprawled across the twin bed, one socked foot dangling over the edge, his phone still glowing on the nightstand. I didn't wake them. Not yet. The yellow notepad sat on the kitchen counter, its pages creased from my late-night revisions. The left column had grown: paper towels, third pack, dish soap, bleach for the stain on the rug, extra toilet plunger. The right column was shorter but heavier: notary fee, attorney consultation, certified mail, property line survey. I'd called the attorney yesterday, a woman named Ms. Hargrove, whose voice was sharp but kind, like a librarian who'd seen it all. Mrs. Marish, she'd said, you've got every right to protect your property. They've overstayed their welcome. We'll make it clear. She'd walked me through the steps, document everything, photograph damages, issue a formal notice. I'd done all that, plus one extra thing she hadn't suggested. I'd taken a video. 32 minutes of footage, narrated in a calm, steady voice, cataloging every infraction. The chipped baseboard, the grease stains on the stove, the missing towel hooks, the dented trash can. I didn't yell in the video. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than anger ever could. The first signs of life came at 7:14 a.m. Kinley's youngest sister, Randa, shuffled into the kitchen, her eczema-reddened hands scratching at her neck. She didn't look at me, just opened the fridge and sighed dramatically. No yogurt, she muttered, as if I'd failed some unspoken test. I didn't respond. I was stirring oatmeal on the stove, the kind I'd made for myself every morning since moving in, plain but grounding, with a pinch of cinnamon. Randa grabbed a granola bar from the counter, my granola bar, the last one in the box I'd hidden behind the cereal, and wandered back to the couch, leaving crumbs in her wake. I added granola bars to the left column. By 8 a.m., the house was waking up, a slow, messy unraveling. Trevor's brother, Jace, was the next to appear, his hair sticking up like he'd slept on a lawnmower. He plugged his charger into the outlet I'd designated for my coffee maker, nudging the machine aside without a word. Wi-Fi still down? He asked, not looking up from his phone. It wasn't down. I changed the password last night. I sipped my coffee and said, I'll check the router later. He grunted, already distracted by a notification. I watched him scroll, his thumb moving like it was the only part of him awake. Kinley came next, her hair in a messy bun, wearing the same oversized sweatshirt she'd had on for 3 days. She didn't notice the notices on the door. She didn't notice the folder on the buffet either, its edges aligned perfectly with the wood grain. Morning, Calvana, she said, her voice bright but brittle, like she was auditioning for kindness. You sleep okay on that couch? I told Trevor to take the smaller room, but you know how he is. I didn't know how he was. I didn't know Trevor, or Jace, or half the people who'd invaded my home. They were Kinley's people, her extended family, her book club friends, her co-workers who'd tagged along because it's a lake house, why not? I nodded, because nodding was easier than explaining that the pull-out couch had left a kink in my neck, that I hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night since they arrived. It's fine, I said. Flexibility, I reminded myself, is only admired when it benefits the person asking for it. The morning unfolded like a poorly rehearsed play. Aunt Doreen complained about the water pressure in the shower. Someone's kid left a sticky handprint on the glass door to the porch. Jay spilled coffee on the counter and wiped it with a paper towel he didn't throw away. I moved through it all like a ghost, refilling the kettle, restocking the napkins, noting every small violation on my notepad. By 10 a.m., the house was a cacophony of voices, laughter, and the clatter of dishes no one bothered to wash. Kinley's cousin Marla, who'd brought her own air mattress like she was staking a claim, asked if I could whip up something quick for lunch. For 22 people? I clarified, my voice even. She laughed, like it was a joke. I didn't laugh back. At 11 a.m., I walked to the front door and tapped the notices with my knuckle, loud enough to draw eyes. Kinley was the first to notice, her brow furrowing as she crossed the room, a half-eaten bagel in her hand. "What's this?" she asked, her tone caught between curiosity and accusation. I didn't answer right away. I let her read, let the words sink in. The room quieted, not all at once, but in patches, like a radio losing signal. Trevor looked up from his phone. Randa stopped scratching. Aunt Doreen, who'd been monologuing about her sciatica, trailed off mid-sentence. "It's a lodging agreement," I said, my voice clear, steady, the way I'd practiced in the mirror at 4 a.m. "This is private property. If you're staying, you need to sign it. It outlines the rules, the costs, the expectations. If you don't sign, you need to leave by noon." I gestured to the folder on the buffet. "There's a copy for each of you. And a pen." Kinley laughed, a sharp, nervous sound. "Calvana, come on. We're family. You don't need to do all this." She waved her hand, like she could dismiss the notices, the folder, the last 5 days of my life. I didn't flinch. I'd spent years swallowing my flinches, tucking them away like linens in a drawer. "It's not about family," I said. "It's about my home. My name is on the deed. Not yours. Not anyone's. Mine." The room was silent now, the kind of silence that feels like a held breath. Jace shifted uncomfortably, his charger still plugged into my outlet. Marla crossed her arms, her air mattress deflating slightly in the corner. Aunt Doreen cleared her throat, but for once, she didn't speak. Kinley's smile faded, replaced by something harder, something I recognized from years of basement laundry and unthanked lunches. "You're serious?" she asked, her voice low. "Dead serious," I said. I picked up the folder and opened it, revealing the stack of agreements, each one printed, stapled, notarized. The daily rate is listed on page 2. So are the damages, itemized. The grape soda on the porch cushions, the broken toilet paper holder, the faucet. It adds up. I set the folder down and slid the receipt next to it, the one they'd ignored for days. $26, $7.94. That's the total so far. I'm happy to split it evenly, or you can figure out who owes what. Kinley's face reddened, but she didn't speak. Trevor muttered something under his breath, and Randa started scratching again, faster this time. I didn't look away. I'd spent decades looking away, nodding, folding, tidying up after people who never said thank you. Not anymore. The cottage wasn't just a house. It was the line I'd drawn, the one I'd been too afraid to draw when Roger was alive, when Camden was young, when Kinley's voice filled every room I tried to call my own. "Checkouts at noon," I repeated. "If you're staying, sign the agreement. If not, I've got a locksmith coming at 1 p.m. to change the locks." I turned and walked to the kitchen, where my oatmeal was still warm in the pot. I heard whispers behind me, the rustle of papers, the creak of a chair. Someone, Marla maybe, said, "She can't be serious." But I was. For the first time in years, I was. By 11:45 a.m., the gravel outside crunched again, this time with the sound of tires retreating. The first van left, then the sedan. Aunt Doreen took her pillow and her sciatica complaints and shuffled out without a goodbye. Trevor and Jace packed their chargers and their attitude, leaving the twin bed unmade. Kinley was the last to go, her suitcase dragging behind her like a reluctant apology. She stopped at the door, the notices still taped there, and looked at me. "I didn't think it was like this," she said, her voice softer now, almost wounded. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The house was mine again, quiet in a way that felt like home. The deputy's boots left faint scuff marks on the entryway mat, the one I'd bought at a flea market 2 towns over, woven from recycled ropes with a pattern of blue waves that reminded me of the lake. I didn't mind the marks. They were temporary, unlike the dents in the coffee table from someone's careless cooler or the faint ring on the windowsill where a beer bottle had sweated through the night. Deputy Clem stood there, broad-shouldered and patient, his radio crackling softly with some distant dispatch call that had nothing to do with us. He wasn't here to arrest anyone, just to enforce, to witness, to make sure the line I'd drawn held firm. I'd called the county office twice this week, first about the potential noise complaints from neighbors who'd already texted me about the late-night laughter spilling onto the shore, and second about the occupancy limits. This cottage was zoned residential, not a hotel, and 22 people pushed it well beyond the cap. He'd been kind on the phone, professional, and now here he was, folder in hand, ready to back up my words with the weight of authority. Kinley's face had gone from pale to flushed, her fingers still clutching the crumpled agreement like it was a ticket to a show she didn't want to see. "You're unbelievable," she said again, her voice rising, echoing off the high ceilings I'd painted eggshell white just last month. The hoodie she wore, Camden's, definitely, with that threadbare elbow patch from his college days, hung on her like a borrowed excuse. She turned to Deputy Clem, as if he might side with her. "This is her family we're talking about. She invited us." "No," I said quietly, stepping forward just enough to reclaim the space between us. "I didn't invite you. You announced. There's a difference." I gestured to the dining table, where the 22 copies lay in their neat stacks, each one a mirror of the next, $140 per person per night, damages billed separately, with an itemized addendum for the faucet, the cushions, the broken holder, full deposit required in advance. I'd printed them at the library yesterday, using the self-serve machine that charged 50 cents a page, and I'd underlined the key sections in blue ink for emphasis. The pens beside each stack were cheap ballpoints from the drawer, but they worked fine. No one had touched them yet. Deputy Clem adjusted his stance, his belt creaking slightly with the movement. "Ma'am," he said to Kinley, his tone even, like he was reading from a script he'd memorized years ago, "Mrs. Marish has provided documentation of prior notice. The verbal agreement via phone, the text messages, it's all here. Under local ordinance, she can require formal lodging terms or request vacancy. It's her property." He flipped to another page in the folder, the one with the photocopy of the deed, my name typed in bold at the top. Calvana Marish, sole owner. No liens, no shared titles. I'd paid cash, scraped together from Roger's life insurance, my part-time job at the bookstore, and years of skipping vacations I never wanted anyway. Camden, still rubbing his eyes like he could wipe away the scene, uncrossed his arms and tried again. "Mom, listen. This is blowing up over nothing. Their family, your grandkids' aunts and uncles, cousins. 2 weeks isn't forever. We can work this out without this." He waved vaguely at the deputy, the agreements, the invisible wall I'd built around the cottage. His voice had that pleading edge, the one he used when he was 10 and wanted extra dessert, or when he was 25 and needed help with his first apartment deposit. But I wasn't the same woman who'd always said yes. That woman had lived in basements and tiptoed through kitchens that weren't hers. "It's not nothing, Camden," I said, my voice steady, though my heart thumped like it was knocking on a door I'd long kept locked. "It's everything. This house is mine. I saved for it, painted it, fixed the leaks in the roof with my own hands. And in 5 days, it's been turned into a frat house. Spills, breaks, noise, without a single thank you or offer to help. If they want to stay, they sign and pay. If not, they go." I paused, looking at him directly. "That includes you and Kinley, if you're part of this." His mouth opened, then closed, like a fish gasping on the dock. Behind him, the murmurs started up again. Trevor, leaning against the wall with his phone out, snorted. "This is nuts. Charging family. What, you gonna bill us for the air we breathe too?" He pocketed his device and grabbed his backpack from the floor, slinging it over one shoulder. Randa, from her spot on the couch, whimpered something about her skin flaring up from the stress, her hands scratching furiously at her arms. Marla, who deflated her air mattress but left it in a heap in the corner, crossed her arms and glared. "I told you this place was too small anyway," she said to no one in particular. "Let's just go to a real hotel." Aunt Gwen wasn't done, though. She shuffled closer, her slippers whispering against the floor, her finger jabbing the air like an accusation. "After everything we've done? Kinley let you live in her house for years, rent-free, cooked for you, included you in holidays. And this is how you repay us. With cops and contracts. Her voice cracked on the last word, but it wasn't sadness, it was outrage, the kind that comes from being caught off guard. I felt a flicker of something old, a guilt I'd carried like a backpack full of rocks, but I set it down. Rent-free. I echoed, my tone calm but pointed. I cooked every meal, cleaned every room, babysat every weekend. I folded your laundry, Gwen, when you visited and left it in piles. I drove your grandkids to school when Kinley was too busy. That wasn't free. That was me paying in silence. I turned to the group, addressing them all now. You've never treated me like family. Not once. No calls on my birthday, no check-ins after Roger's funeral. You took, and I gave. But this, I swept my hand over the table, the agreements glowing white under the light. This is where it stops. The room hung in that moment, tension thick as fog rolling off the lake. Deputy Clem cleared his throat again, breaking the spell. Folks, you've got until 6 p.m. Sign or vacate. I'll be patrolling the area today. If there's any issue, Mrs. Marish knows how to reach me. He nodded at me, a small gesture of respect, and headed for the door, his boots leaving another faint mark I'd buff out later. The exodus started slowly. Trevor was the first to grab his things, muttering curses under his breath as he stuffed clothes into his duffel. Fine, we're out. This place sucks anyway. Randa followed, her bag half-packed, pausing only to snag a water bottle from the fridge. My water bottle, the one with the insulated sleeve I'd bought for hikes I hadn't taken yet. Marla deflated her mattress fully this time, rolling it up with exaggerated huffs, and dragged it out to the van. One by one, they filtered out, cousins I barely knew, aunts who'd never learned my middle name, friends of friends who'd tagged along for the free lake vacation. Cars crunched over the gravel, doors slamming, voices fading into the distance. Kinley lingered, helping Camden pack their shared suitcase, her movements sharp and jerky. She didn't look at me until the end, when the house was nearly empty, the air lighter, the sense of takeout and body spray dissipating. I didn't think you had it in you, she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. There was no apology in it, just surprise, maybe a hint of resentment. Camden stood beside her, silent now, his role as mediator dissolved. I didn't either, I admitted, but only to myself in my head. Out loud, I said, drive safe. They left without signing, without paying, the receipt still untouched on the table amid the abandoned pens. By evening, the cottage was mine again. I walked through each room, opening windows to let in the fresh air, fluffing pillows that had been flattened, wiping counters that gleamed under my touch. The notices stayed on the door a little longer, a reminder to myself more than anyone. I sat on the porch as the sun dipped low, the lake turning gold and pink, and for the first time in decades, I felt the quiet not as loneliness, but as peace. The yellow notepad was still on the counter, its columns complete. Left side, restock groceries, repair faucet. Right side, boundaries set, freedom claimed. I tore off the page and started a new one, blank and full of possibility. The house exhaled as the last car vanished around the curve, the gravel driveway settling into silence, no longer bruised by the weight of tires or the careless shuffle of feet. The air smelled faintly of dust and diesel, the remnants of their exodus mingling with the crisp lake breeze that slipped through the open windows. I stood at the gate, the clipboard still in my hands, its edges biting into my palms. It was heavier than it looked, not from the paper, the neatly flagged printouts, or the text message screenshots I'd spent hours organizing, but from the weight of finally choosing myself. The notice on the porch fluttered, its tape peeling slightly at one corner, the words, private property, short-term lodging agreement required, catching the late afternoon sun like a quiet rebellion. Inside, the cottage was a museum of their carelessness. Crumpled towels lay in heaps on the guest room floor, the cotton faded from years of use but still mine, still marked with the faint bleach stains from when I tried to salvage them after Kinley's daughter spilled nail polish. A makeup bag sat abandoned in the guest bathroom, its zipper half open, spilling powdery blush across the sink like a faint bruise on the porcelain. The beds were unmade, sheets tangled and half pulled from the corners, as if the occupants had fled mid-dream. A pizza crust balanced precariously on the living room windowsill, hardened into a crescent of neglect. I didn't touch any of it. Not yet. I walked to the dining table, where the 22 unsigned agreements still sat in their stacks, untouched pens scattered like fallen soldiers. The receipt, $26, $7.94, itemized down to the grape soda stains and the cracked toilet paper holder, lay beside them, ignored as thoroughly as my boundaries had been for years. I set the clipboard down next to it, the faint clatter of metal against wood echoing in the quiet. The candle I'd lit flickered on the counter, a small amber glow casting shadows that danced across the kitchen tiles I'd chosen for their slate-gray calm. It was the first time in 9 days I'd sat at the table without a task. No dishes to clear, no spills to wipe, no lists to write. I just sat, letting the silence wrap around me like a quilt, heavy but warm, full of everything they hadn't taken: dignity, peace, the space to breathe. The envelope Camden left behind caught my eye, its unsealed flap curling slightly, as if it wanted to speak before I did. His handwriting was unmistakable, tight and careful, the same script he'd used in high school for notes he didn't want smudged. "I hope one day you see how cold this was." No signature, just that accusation, sharp as a splinter. I read it once, then folded it, once, twice, until it was a small square of regret. I didn't cry. I didn't linger, searching for softness in his words. I carried it to the fireplace, where the embers from the candle's kindling still glowed faintly. The paper caught fast, curling inward like it was pleading for forgiveness. I didn't grant it. The flames ate the words, leaving only ash and the faint smell of charred ink. Kinley's voice echoed in my mind as I watched the fire die. "You made this hostile." She'd said it with her arms crossed, her mouth tight, standing on the sidewalk like she was delivering a verdict. I'd replied calmly, "No, I just made it clear." But the truth was heavier than that. Hostile wasn't the half-empty soda cans littering the porch or the flower pots knocked over by someone's careless elbow. No apology, just the crunch of terracotta underfoot. Hostile was 6 years in a basement, folding laundry that wasn't mine, cooking meals I didn't eat, smiling through Kinley's casual dismissals. "Oh, Calvana, you're so good at this." Hostile was the assumption that my time, my space, my life were communal property. I'd made it clear, yes, but clarity wasn't cold. It was fire, burning away the fog of obligation. I walked through the house slowly, room by room, letting the silence settle into the corners. The primary bedroom, where Aunt Gwen had sprawled like a queen, still smelled faintly of her lavender lotion, the kind that made my nose itch. The twin bed in Camden's room, my room, for when he visited alone, was cluttered with Trevor's empty energy drink cans, their silver rims glinting like accusations. The bathroom mirror was smudged with fingerprints, the sink dusted with makeup and dried toothpaste. I didn't clean a thing. Instead, I pulled out my phone, opened the camera, and started documenting. Click, the chipped baseboard where someone's suitcase had scraped. Click, the grease stain on the stove from a late-night fry session. Click, the pizza crust, still perched like a forgotten relic. 37 photos, each one time-stamped, each one a brick in the wall I was building. By 10 a.m. the next day, the cleaning service arrived. 2 women, Maria and Lena, pulled up in a white van with "Sunrise Cleaners" painted on the side in cheerful blue letters. They were kind, efficient, their smiles warm but professional as they stepped inside with mops and buckets. I made them tea, chamomile, from the tin I'd hidden in the back of the pantry, and offered them the oatmeal cookies I'd baked the night before, the first thing I'd cooked for myself since the invasion began. "This is a beautiful place," Maria said, her eyes sweeping over the lake view through the living room windows. "You must love it here." "I do," I said, and for the first time, I meant it without reservation. "It's home." They worked quickly, scrubbing the sink, stripping the beds, vacuuming the trail mix crumbs from the hallway carpet. I didn't hover. I sat on the porch with my tea, the lake sparkling under a sky so clear it felt like a promise. The invoice I'd drafted for Kinley was already in my email, a PDF attachment with a subject line that read, simply, itemized costs, $26,794, plus $450 for the cleaning service, $75 for the plumber who'd fix the faucet, and $30 for the replacement flower pots. I didn't expect payment, not really. But sending it felt like closing a door, locking it, and keeping the key. As Maria and Lena worked, a car pulled up, not a van, not a sedan, but a small hatchback I didn't recognize. A woman stepped out, her hair pulled back in a neat bun, her glasses catching the sunlight. She carried a manila folder and a smile that was polite but cautious. "Mrs. Marish," she called, walking up the path. "I'm Ms. Hargrove, from the attorney's office. We spoke yesterday." I stood, brushing my hands on my jeans, and invited her inside. The house smelled of lemon cleaner now, the chaos erased, though the memory of it lingered in my bones. We sat at the dining table, clean now, no coffee rings or crumpled agreements, and she opened her folder. "You've done everything right," she said, scanning the photos I'd emailed her last night. "The documentation is airtight. If they try to contest this, they won't have a leg to stand on." She slid a new document across the table, a revised lodging agreement with additional clauses for future guests. No unannounced arrivals, no stays longer than 3 days without prior approval, full liability for damages. "This is your shield," she said. "Keep it updated, and don't hesitate to use it." I nodded, signing where she indicated, my hand steady. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. She left with a handshake and a promise to follow up if Kinley or anyone else pushed back. I didn't think they would. They'd scattered like leaves in a storm, their indignation no match for the clarity of my boundaries. That evening, I walked to the lake's edge, the grass cool under my bare feet. The water lapped gently at the shore, reflecting a sunset that bled orange and purple into the sky. I thought of Camden's note, now ash in the fireplace, and Kinley's tight-lipped accusation of hostility. I thought of the years I'd spent bending, shrinking, making myself small enough to fit into their lives. And I thought of the cottage, its walls still creaking faintly as they settled, its rooms empty but full of possibility. I didn't need their approval, their gratitude, or their Venmo transfers. I had this, a home, a line drawn, a life reclaimed. I went back inside, lit another candle, and opened the yellow notepad to a fresh page. No columns this time, no lists of damages or supplies. Just one word, written in my own steady hand: enough. The short-term rental agreement sat on my desk, her signature scrawled at the bottom in those bold, impatient strokes I could still pick out in a crowd of 1,000. The email subject line, "Final statement for your stay," glared back at me, unyielding, a digital monument to the transaction's end. No warmth, no trace of guilt, just the cold clarity of numbers. Nights booked, damages noted, fees calculated. It was the kind of math that didn't bend, no matter how much she'd assumed the rules were optional. A suggestion she could sidestep with a smile or a shrug. This wasn't about punishment. It was about boundaries, tallied and delivered, a line drawn in the dirt after weeks of blurred edges. I didn't linger for a reply. I snapped my laptop shut, the click of the lid like a gavel's fall, and poured myself a cup of coffee, black and strong enough to jolt me into the present. I carried the mug to the window, where the gravel path stretched toward the road, glinting under a sky so pale it felt like a blank page, a new chapter. The air smelled of dust and early autumn, crisp enough to notice but not cold enough to sting. I leaned against the sill, watching a sparrow dart between the branches of the oak I hadn't trimmed since spring. The world outside was quiet, save for the occasional crunch of leaves under a passing car. Inside, it was quieter still, no footsteps thundering up the stairs, no voices debating who got the bigger room. Just me, the coffee, and the house settling into its own rhythm. When I opened the desk drawer to file the receipt, my fingers brushed against the stack of welcome cards I'd bought before they arrived. They were still wrapped in cellophane, their cheerful, "make yourself at home" script untouched by ink or intention. I'd pictured writing little notes, maybe leaving a basket of snacks or a guide to the local trails. Instead, they'd stayed in the drawer, waiting for a warmth that never came. I didn't tear them up or toss them out. I closed the drawer gently, like shutting a book I might revisit later, when the sting of their disregard had faded. A week slipped by, soft and unhurried. No messages lit up my phone, no sudden knocks rattled the door, no last-minute arrivals dragged coolers and duffel bags across my hardwood floors. The first morning, I woke early, the kind of early that feels stolen from the world's demands. I pulled on my old gardening gloves, the ones with dirt caked into the seams, and knelt in the front yard. The soil was dry, compacted where their folding chairs had sunk in during late-night gatherings that spilled past midnight. I tugged at the weeds, their roots resisting before giving way with a satisfying snap. The lavender needed trimming, its purple tips brittle from neglect. I reset the stepping stones, each one kicked askew by careless feet, and pressed them back into the earth with a sense of finality. The work was quiet, steady, mine. No one rushed me to find an extension cord or asked if I had another air mattress stashed somewhere. By noon, I was in the kitchen, brewing tea in the good cup, the one with the hairline crack I'd always worried someone would shatter. I held it carefully, savoring the warmth against my palms, the faint scent of chamomile curling up in the steam. Outside, a neighbor I hadn't met yet waved from the sidewalk, her dog tugging at its leash. Another stopped by later with a tin of blueberry muffins, her smile easy as she said, "Noticed you finally moved in. Welcome inside." She didn't ask about the stream of guests or the chairs that had littered the lawn. She just handed me the tin and left, her footsteps fading down the path. The muffins were still warm, crumbly, a little too sweet. I ate one at the counter, not bothering with a plate, letting the crumbs fall where they may. The silence wasn't lonely, it was restorative, like a long exhale after holding my breath for weeks. It filled my chest slowly, let my shoulders drop an inch lower. No loud voices echoed down the hall, no music thumped through the ceiling. No one asked if I had gluten-free bread or a charger for their third phone. The laundry basket sat empty, the sink gleamed, free of dishes stacked like a game of Jenga. I watered the plants, their leaves perking up under the steady stream from the can. I straightened the chairs around the dining table, each one perfectly aligned, and flung open every window just because I could. The breeze carried in the scent of cut grass and distant wood smoke. No one complained about the thermostat being too high or too low. No one suggested the meal plan needed more variety, or called me rigid for expecting a little respect in my own home. The house didn't feel too big or too small. It felt just right, like slipping into a favorite sweater after years of wearing someone else's. There were no calls from Camden, no texts from Kinley, but I didn't feel erased. I felt unburdened, like I'd set down a suitcase I'd been carrying for miles. Sometimes choosing peace doesn't come with applause or fanfare. It comes with stillness, the kind that lets you hear your own thoughts again. I spent one late afternoon at the edge of the garden, sitting on a low stone wall I'd built years ago, watching a squirrel dart across the grass, chasing its own shadow in a frantic loop. It stopped, twitched its tail, and scampered up a tree, leaving the lawn empty again. I looked up at the wind chimes I'd finally hung after months of meaning to. They swayed gently, catching the breeze, their soft clinks rising and falling only when the wind allowed. I hadn't noticed their music in years, not since I'd stopped listening for it. Kinley called again 2 nights ago, her name flashing on my phone like a warning light. Then twice more yesterday, each call unanswered, followed by a string of texts. Some were polite, tiptoeing around the edges of apology. "Can we talk about what happened?" Others were sharp, edged with frustration. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." One simply read, "We need to talk." Camden's message came later, measured but insistent. "Can we clear the air? It's been long enough." I read them all, let the words sit in the quiet of the living room, but I didn't reply. Not out of spite, not because I was nursing some grudge. I was finished. Done carrying the weight of their expectations. Done pretending this house was a revolving door or a doormat for their convenience. I thought about the early days, when I'd open the place to guests, imagining laughter and shared stories, maybe even friendships that lingered past checkout. Instead, I'd gotten spilled wine on the rug, complaints about the Wi-Fi speed, and Kinley's voice, bright and careless, saying, "It's just a rental, relax." But this wasn't just a rental. It was my home, built with years of saving, dreaming, hammering nails into beams I'd chosen myself. It wasn't meant to hold the chaos of people who saw it as temporary, a backdrop for their weekend plans. It was mine, still is, and now it felt like it again. Yesterday, I walked the perimeter of the property, something I hadn't done in months. The fence needed a new coat of paint, but the posts were sturdy, rooted deep. I found a forgotten birdhouse tucked behind the shed, its roof weathered but intact. I hung it on a low branch, filled it with seed, and watched a chickadee land within the hour, its tiny beak pecking at the offering. The sky was turning pink at the edges, the kind of sunset that feels like a promise. I stood there longer than I meant to, the air cooling against my skin, the world narrowing to the rustle of leaves and the faint hum of crickets waking up for the night. This morning, I woke to the smell of rain through the open window. The gravel path was dark with it, the stones slick and shining. I made coffee again, used the same mug, and sat at the kitchen table with a notebook I hadn't touched in years. I wrote down the things I wanted to do, not for the house, not for guests, but for me. A trip to the coast, maybe. A new bookshelf for the novels I'd been meaning to read. A cooking class, just to learn something I'd never needed to know before. The list grew, sprawling across the page, each line a small rebellion against the life I'd let others define for too long. The phone stayed quiet today. No texts, no calls, no demands. I didn't check it more than once. Instead, I pulled on my boots and headed back to the garden, where the lavender was starting to look alive again. I clipped a few sprigs, tied them with twine, and set them on the windowsill to dry. The house smelled like earth and possibility. And when I looked out at the path again, the sky was still that pale, endless blue, but now it felt less like a blank page and more like a canvas, one I'd finally started to paint. The locks were changed on a Tuesday morning, under a sky so crisp it seemed to hum with possibility. The locksmith's van idled at the edge of the gravel path, its engine a low rumble against the quiet of the dawn. I stood on the porch, watching the dust settle as he drove away, the new keys in my hand sharp and unfamiliar, their weight a quiet promise. The old welcome sign, its paint peeling like a forgotten memory, was gone, replaced by a new one, by appointment only, carved in letters that didn't apologize. It wasn't cruelty, it was clarity, a line drawn not to exclude but to define. This house, this life was mine, and I was done offering it up as a stage for others' chaos. Inside, the guest room stood pristine, the bed made with linens so crisp they could have been from a magazine. The pillows were fluffed, the curtains drawn just enough to let in a sliver of morning light. But I no longer left the door ajar, no longer pretended it was waiting for someone to claim it. The closet held only my things now, winter coats, a pair of boots I hadn't worn in years, a box of letters I'd meant to sort through. No suitcases, no forgotten chargers, no traces of people who saw my home as a temporary backdrop. I cooked for one now, simple meals that didn't bend to anyone else's tastes, roasted carrots with thyme, a single piece of salmon, a glass of Pinot Noir chosen because it made me smile, not because it checked someone else's box. Grocery shopping was a ritual of freedom, my cart filled with what I wanted, a loaf of sourdough, a jar of local honey, a bundle of kale no one would call too green. My days were quiet, my nights were mine, and the house seemed to breathe easier, its creaks softer, its shadows gentler. 2 days after the last car pulled away, its tires spitting gravel in a haste I didn't miss, I sat across from my lawyer in her office. The room smelled of old books and lemon polish, and her glasses slid down her nose as she read the deed, her pen tapping a steady rhythm against the desk. We didn't touch the ownership, my name was etched there, unyielding. Instead, we added a single clause, plain and binding. Inheritance is contingent upon demonstrated respect. It wasn't vengeance, though I could picture Kinley's sharp gasp, her fingers tightening around her phone, or Camden's brow furrowing as he tried to unravel the words. It was structure, a map for those who'd mistaken my silence for weakness, my hospitality for a free pass. The clause was a stone in the foundation of this new life I was building, one where my boundaries weren't suggestions but truths. I signed my name with a steady hand, the pen gliding across the page, and when I looked up, the lawyer's nod was small but sure, like she understood more than the paperwork. Back home, I slid the notarized pages into the desk drawer beside the keybox, locking it with a soft click that echoed in the quiet. The folder didn't feel heavy, not like the months of carrying other people's expectations, their complaints, their careless footprints across my floors. It felt like certainty, like stepping off a swaying boat onto solid ground. I turned to the house, the afternoon light spilling through the windows, painting the hardwood in shades of gold and amber. The plants on the sill, a stubborn pothose, a fern I'd coaxed back from the edge, were blooming again, their leaves reaching for the sun like they, too, had been waiting for permission to thrive. Outside, the wind chimes sang when the breeze nudged them, their notes soft and unforced, not yanked into sound by impatient hands. The house was alive, not with the clamor of guests but with its own rhythm, one I was learning to follow. I thought about the years before, when I'd first opened this place to strangers, imagining laughter, shared stories, maybe even friendships that lingered past checkout. I'd spent hours choosing the perfect throw blankets, writing welcome notes, stocking the fridge with local jams and sparkling water. But those dreams had been trampled by spilled wine on the rug, complaints about the Wi-Fi speed, Kinley's bright, careless voice saying, "It's just a rental, relax." It wasn't just a rental. It was my home, built with years of saving, dreaming, hammering nails into beams I'd chosen myself. It wasn't meant to hold the chaos of people who saw it as temporary, a backdrop for their weekend plans. It was meant to hold me, my quiet mornings, my late-night reading, my small rituals of joy. Kinley will call again, I'm sure of it. Her name will flash on my phone, insistent, maybe softened with an attempt at remorse, maybe sharp with the frustration of someone used to getting her way. Camden, too, will send another text, his words careful but pressing, asking to clear the air, as if the air wasn't already the clearest it's been in years. They won't understand, not at first. People used to taking time, space, energy, often see boundaries as betrayal, as if saying no is an act of war rather than a claim to peace. But this isn't a feud. I'm not fighting. I'm preserving, carving out a space where I don't have to brace for the next request, the next complaint, the next assumption that my life is theirs to reshape. The lessons came slowly, crystallizing in the quiet moments. Respect doesn't need permission to exist. It grows where you stop waiting for approval. It's in the new locks, not to keep others out but to keep yourself safe. It's in the meals you cook without apology, the signs you hang without explanation, the silence you choose without guilt. I learned that standing firm isn't loud. It's the steady beat of your own heart, unswayed by someone else's rhythm. Clear communication isn't just words. It's the weight of a new key, the clarity of a single clause on a page. And prioritizing yourself isn't selfish. It's survival, the kind that lets you bloom like the plants on my sill, reaching for light because you know you deserve it. One morning, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, the chipped mug I'd come to love for its imperfections warm in my hands. The house smelled of earth and possibility, the lavender I'd clipped from the garden drying on the windowsill. I opened a notebook, one I hadn't touched in years, its pages yellowed at the edges. I wrote down what I wanted to carry forward, not rules, not resolutions, but promises to myself. To keep the locks changed, not out of fear but pride. To hang signs that reflect my truth, not someone else's expectations. To live in a way that feels like home, not a stage for others to perform on. The list grew, sprawling across the page, each line a small rebellion against the life I'd let others define. I thought about sharing this with someone, not Kinley or Camden, but someone who might need to hear it. A neighbor, perhaps, or a friend bending under the weight of others' needs. I imagined saying, "Protect your peace. It's worth more than their approval." I imagined them nodding, maybe slowly, the way you do when a truth lands just right. I thought of the neighbor who'd brought the muffins, her smile easy as she said, "Welcome inside," not asking about the chairs that had littered the lawn or the guests who'd come and gone. She'd seen me, not the version of me that existed for others. Maybe I'd invite her over, share a cup of tea, tell her how the silence had become a friend, not a void. The garden became my sanctuary in those first weeks. I spent mornings replanting, pulling weeds, resetting the stepping stones that had been kicked askew. The soil was dry where folding chairs had sunk in during late-night gatherings that stretched past midnight, voices loud and careless. I trimmed the lavender, its scent clinging to my hands, and swept the path until it gleamed under the sun. One afternoon, I found a forgotten birdhouse behind the shed, its roof weathered but intact. I hung it on a low branch, filled it with seed, and watched a chickadee land within the hour, its tiny beak pecking at the offering. The sky was turning pink at the edges, the kind of sunset that feels like a promise kept. I stood there longer than I meant to, the air cooling against my skin, the world narrowing to the rustle of leaves and the faint hum of crickets waking for the night. Yesterday, I walked the perimeter of the property, something I hadn't done since the early days of moving in. The fence needed a new coat of paint, but the posts were sturdy, rooted deep. I found a patch of wildflowers growing near the back gate, their petals bright against the fading grass. I didn't pick them, I let them be, let them grow where they'd chosen. The house stood behind me, its windows catching the last of the daylight, and I felt a quiet pride. This was mine, not just the deed or the keys, but the life I was building inside it. The wind chimes caught a gust, their notes rising and falling like a conversation with the sky. I stood still, listening, knowing this was enough. Knowing I was enough. This morning, I woke to the smell of rain through the open window. The gravel path was dark with it, the stones slick and shining. I made coffee in the same chipped mug, sat at the kitchen table, and added to my notebook. A trip to the coast, maybe, to feel the salt air on my face. A new bookshelf for the novels I'd been meaning to read. A cooking class, just to learn something new, something for me. The list was a map, not of where I'd been, but of where I was going. The phone stayed quiet, no texts, no calls, no demands. I didn't check it more than once. Instead, I pulled on my boots and headed to the garden, where the lavender was thriving, its purple tips brighter than they'd been in months. I clipped a few sprigs, tied them with twine, and set them on the windowsill to dry. The house smelled like earth, like hope, like home. And as I looked out at the path, The sky was still that pale, endless blue, but now it felt less like a blank page and more like a canvas, one I'd finally started to paint, stroke by stroke, with colors I'd chosen myself.